My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old. I've spent most of my life here, in a small house in the heart of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I married David when I was 23, and for years we built our life together, raising two wonderful children, Emily and Joshua, who are now adults living their own lives. The house used to be full of laughter, the sound of children's feet running around, and the occasional family gathering. But now it's empty, quiet, just the ticking of the clock in the corner of the kitchen. I used to think I had everything figured out, married to a hard-working, dependable man, raised my children, and kept the house in order. I thought that was enough, but I didn't see the cracks forming in my marriage, at least not at first. It wasn't until the children left for their own adventures that I began to feel the absence in our lives, the absence of not just our children, but David. He started to come home later and later. His attention drifted, and slowly, the man who used to be my companion seemed to turn into a stranger. I didn't understand what was happening. There was no big argument, no dramatic moment where everything came to light. It was subtle at first, little things. David, once so affectionate, stopped holding my hand. He would return from work, tired, barely acknowledging my presence. Conversations became brief, distant. I remember one night, I asked him if we could do something together, maybe a movie or dinner out. He just looked at me and said, "I'm fine, Marg. I don't need anything right now. Let's just relax." That was the moment when I realized something had shifted, but I wasn't sure what or why. Over the next few weeks, the changes in David became more pronounced. I began to notice that he was spending more time at work, or so he said. His phone calls became more frequent, always whispered conversations, never really explaining who he was talking to. I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my chest every time the phone rang. I would see him glance at it, then immediately step out of the room to answer. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, that maybe it was just work-related. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I remember one Sunday afternoon, just after lunch, when I decided to walk over to the neighbor's house. Mrs. Clarkson, who lived 2 doors down, was sitting in her garden, sipping tea. I waved, and we started chatting, as we always did. It was during one of these casual chats that she mentioned something that took me by surprise. "Margaret, dear, I'm sure you've noticed how much David has been coming home later lately. It's funny, isn't it?" she said, almost too casually. I froze. How did she know that? I never said anything to anyone. I just nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. She continued, "Well, I overheard a conversation between David and some of the other neighbors the other day. They were talking about how he's been seen a lot around town with a younger woman. I didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know." A younger woman? The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I was stunned, speechless. The woman who had been married for nearly 40 years, the woman who had devoted so much of her life to raising children, managing a home, and supporting her husband, now stood in a moment of silence. I didn't know how to react, how to respond to the fact that my husband, the man I had given my life to, might be betraying me. The idea that David, my David, was seeing someone else seemed impossible. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. His late nights at work, the whispers on the phone, the distance between us. It wasn't a coincidence. I had been in denial, convincing myself that things would get better. But now, it was as if everything had been laid out before me, and I couldn't look away. That evening, I decided to confront him. I waited until after dinner when he was sitting in his chair, flipping through a magazine. I asked him, in the most calm tone I could manage, "David, is there something you want to tell me? I've been hearing things, and I need to know the truth." He looked at me, his eyes cold, as if he were already preparing himself for what was coming. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me for a long time, and then muttered, "It's not what you think, Margaret. I didn't want to hurt you." But the words didn't matter. They weren't enough to erase the growing fear in my chest. I had already felt the betrayal in my bones before the truth even came out. My heart sank. The man I had loved, the man who had promised to be with me forever, had chosen someone else. Before I continue the next part of my journey, I want to ask something from you, my dear listener. If you've ever felt betrayed, lost, or unsure of what to do in a relationship, I want to hear your story. Please leave a comment below, share where you're from, and let me know how you found the strength to move on. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe. This journey has just begun, and I'd love to share it with you. And don't forget to give me a thumbs up if this story has touched your heart. You are never alone in your struggles. We're in this together. I spent the rest of the night in a haze. After David's admission, I felt like the world had just cracked open. It wasn't anger that I felt at first. It wasn't even sadness. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name. A suffocating silence filled the room, and all I could think was how everything I had believed in, every promise we had made to each other, was a lie. The next morning, he left for work without saying a word to me. I stayed in the kitchen, trying to keep my composure. I poured a cup of coffee, though I wasn't sure if I could even drink it. My mind raced, replaying every conversation, every moment, everything that had led up to this. I wanted to confront him again, to demand more answers, but deep down, I already knew that the man I had married was gone. What I had now was a stranger in his place. By late afternoon, the phone rang, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a call from the office. I let it ring for a moment, unsure of what to do, but I knew I had to face it. With trembling hands, I picked up the receiver. "Hello, Margaret. It's Steve from the office. David didn't come in today. He's not feeling well, I think? Is everything okay?" Steve's voice was casual, like he was just doing his job, but there was an edge to it, something that made my stomach churn. I swallowed the lump in my throat before replying. "Yes, he's fine. Just dealing with some things. He'll be in tomorrow." After I hung up, I stood there, frozen, for a long time. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had spent so many years by David's side, helping him build our life together. And now, everything felt so fragile, like it could all shatter in an instant. I thought back to our younger years, to the laughter, to the plans we made. We were once so full of hope, so sure that we would grow old together. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. And now, I couldn't even recognize the man I had married. But as much as I hurt, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be left in the dark anymore. I was tired of feeling small, of feeling like I had to be quiet and accept what he was doing. It was time for me to take control. I made the decision that night. I would confront him again, but this time it would be different. This time, I would stand tall, no matter how much it hurt. I wasn't going to beg for answers or let him make me feel guilty for his actions. He had chosen this path, and now it was my turn to decide what came next. I want to hear from you, my dear friend. Have you ever had to face the truth about a relationship that was falling apart? How did you handle it? Please share your story in the comments below. I know we can all learn from each other's experiences. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. There's much more to come, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The next day, David came home later than usual. I could tell he was trying to avoid me, but I wasn't going to let him get away this time. I had prepared myself. No more pretending. No more waiting for answers that would never come. He had already betrayed my trust, and now it was time for me to reclaim what I could from the wreckage. When he stepped inside, I didn't even look at him at first. I stood at the kitchen counter, pretending to be busy. I could feel his eyes on me, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my vulnerability. Instead, I focused on the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor, each one dragging heavier than the last. He knew what was coming. We both did. "Margaret?" His voice was soft, almost apologetic, but I wasn't in the mood for apologies. Not anymore. I turned to face him slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had happened between us. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. "No more games. No more lies." He stiffened, his hand clutching the back of a chair as if he needed it to hold himself up. I could see the guilt on his face, but I was done with pity. I had given him that for years, trying to understand him, trying to make excuses for him, but no more. "I already know about Sarah," I said, watching the blood drain from his face. His lips parted as if he was about to say something, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Don't even try. I found the messages on your phone. I know everything, David." He stared at me, wide-eyed, as if he couldn't believe I had figured it out. "Margaret, it's not what you think," he started, but I didn't let him finish. His excuses weren't going to save him now. "No, David, it's exactly what I think," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "You've been seeing her for months, lying to me, hiding behind closed doors, and for what? To feel desired again. To feel like you were important." I took a step closer, narrowing the gap between us. "You had me. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, he just stood there, looking like a man caught in the very trap he had set for himself. His eyes darted from the floor to me, but he couldn't meet my gaze for long. I had never seen him this small before. This was the man I had spent years building a life with? This man who couldn't even be honest with me? "What do you want me to say, Margaret?" he finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "That I'm sorry? That I regret it?" "It's too late for that, isn't it?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw everything I could find at him, but I stayed calm. I had to, because in that moment, I realized something crucial. It wasn't about his apology anymore. It wasn't about his regrets or how sorry he felt. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my peace, my future. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "I want you to leave this house, David. You've made your choice, and it's clear I'm not a part of it anymore." His eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing his face. "Margaret, please." His voice cracked, but I wasn't moved. "I still love you. This isn't the end." I laughed bitterly. "You still love me? Is that why you've been lying to me for months? Is that why you've been with someone else? You've had plenty of chances to show me love, David, but you chose not to." For the first time, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the same vulnerability I had once thought was a strength in him. But it wasn't. It was just another mask. "I'm sorry," he whispered, almost pleading, but it was too late. I could feel my heart breaking, but in that moment, I understood. I wasn't going to beg for his love. I wasn't going to ask for scraps of affection when I deserved so much more. "You don't get to say sorry anymore," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "You're not the man I married, David, and I'm not the woman I used to be either." I turned my back on him, walking toward the door, my heart pounding. I felt like I was making a decision I would never be able to undo, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. I wasn't going to stay in this marriage just because it was familiar. I wasn't going to let the years of history cloud my judgment. He had shown me who he was, and now it was time for me to show him who I had become. Have you ever had to confront someone you loved and realize that the person standing before you wasn't the same one you had once trusted? Tell me your story in the comments below. I want to know how you handled it. And if this story is resonating with you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Let's keep this conversation going. It's more important than ever that we share our experiences and support each other through the tough times. Stay with me for the next chapter, because the journey is far from over. The next few days were a blur. David left the house with only a few clothes packed in a bag, and I stood there, watching him go. I had prepared myself for this moment for so long, but when it actually happened, it felt surreal. Part of me expected him to come back, to beg me for forgiveness, to somehow make this all okay. But the other part of me, the stronger part, knew that this was the best decision I could have ever made. The house was quiet now, too quiet. It was just me, my thoughts, and the echoes of a life I had spent years building with him. I had never truly considered what life would be like without David. We had spent so much time together, so many memories, that the thought of being alone was terrifying. But as each hour passed, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I had been alone for years, even while he was in the same room as me. The house was full of his absence. His things were gone, and yet I still felt him everywhere. The scent of his cologne in the hallway, the spots on the sofa where he used to sit, the photos on the wall. I'd lived in this house for over 30 years, but it had never felt as empty as it did now. I didn't want to linger on the past, though. It was time for me to focus on what lay ahead. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to learn to live for myself. I spent the next couple of weeks rearranging the house. I changed the layout of the living room, moved my furniture, and put up new photos, ones that were just of me. I started small, doing things I hadn't done in years, cooking meals just for me, listening to music I enjoyed without worrying about whether he liked it. I even started going for walks in the park again, something I hadn't done since before we had kids. There was something freeing about all of it, like I was slowly peeling away the layers of a person I no longer recognized and uncovering the woman I had forgotten. But even as I embraced this new chapter, there were days when loneliness crept in. It wasn't the same loneliness I had felt in my marriage. No, this one was different. This was the kind of loneliness that came with change, with shedding old skin and learning to walk in new shoes. It was a painful, raw kind of loneliness, but one that made me realize how much strength I had left inside me. The hardest part was the silence. The absence of his voice, the absence of his presence in the house, left a space that was hard to fill. I tried not to think about what he was doing, who he was with. It wasn't my business anymore. But sometimes, the thought of him moving on so easily, without a second thought for me, burned. The anger bubbled up, but I tried to keep it under control. He had made his choices. Now it was my turn to make mine. If you're reading this and thinking about your own life, your own relationships, I want you to know something. You're not alone. There's strength in your story, just like there's strength in mine. If you've ever had to rebuild after a heartbreak, or if you're struggling to make a tough decision, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your experiences, and let's create a community of support right here. You never know who might need to hear your words. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. I'll be right here, sharing the next chapter of my journey, because no matter how hard the road gets, we all deserve a chance to start fresh. I'll be waiting for you in the next one. It's strange how freedom, when you've been chained for so long, can feel so heavy. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped by my own choices. I kept asking myself, was this the right thing to do? It wasn't that I regretted leaving David, not exactly. But in the silence of my home, it was hard to avoid the weight of my decision. I found myself missing him, but not for the reasons I thought I would. It wasn't the intimacy I missed, nor the shared moments. It was the comfort of knowing someone was there, even if they weren't truly present. I had spent so many years longing for something more, but now that I had nothing, it was almost too quiet, too still. But I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't put on the facade of happiness just to fill the emptiness. The days blended together as I adjusted to my new reality. I went to work, came home, cooked for one, watched TV in the evenings, and went to bed. It was a routine that felt oddly comforting and suffocating at the same time. There were moments when I wondered if I would ever feel alive again, if I would ever feel anything but the weight of the past. The house, which once felt like a symbol of our shared life, now felt like a prison I was desperately trying to escape. But each time I walked around the rooms, I felt a strange sense of ownership. This was mine now. The walls, the furniture, the kitchen where I spent hours making meals that nobody would appreciate. It was my life, and I had to learn how to fill the space with something meaningful again. I realized I had forgotten what it was like to want something for myself. For so many years, I had lived for David and the kids, trying to make sure everyone was happy, never really stopping to think about my own happiness. Now, I had to figure out what it meant to live for me. One evening, I went to the store and bought a new plant. I placed it by the window, its leaves reaching toward the sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was something that wasn't for anyone else, something just for me. It felt good. The next weekend, I went out with a friend to a local cafe. We sat outside, sipping coffee, talking about nothing and everything. As I looked around at the people passing by, I realized that I had spent so many years invisible, not just to David, but to myself. But in that moment, sitting there with my friend, laughing and listening, I felt like I had been seen again. It was a small thing, but it was a start. Have you ever felt like you lost yourself in the middle of caring for everyone else? If so, I want to hear from you. Share your journey, your thoughts on what it means to find yourself again after a difficult change. Your story could be the one that helps someone else realize they're not alone in this. Time passed, but the quiet remained. I tried to fill my days with distractions, work, friends, and the occasional evening out. But the truth was, I felt lost in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the loss of David that was weighing on me. It was the loss of who I had become in our relationship. I didn't know how to navigate the world on my own. I had spent so many years defining myself through him, through us, that I was now a stranger to myself. I began to feel the effects of living alone more acutely. The sound of silence wasn't just something that existed at night anymore. It was present during the day, too. Every time I walked into a room that had once been filled with laughter, with the energy of a family, I felt the absence. And it wasn't just the absence of David, it was the absence of me. Who had I become in that life? Was I just a shell of the woman I used to be, someone who had faded into the background of her own existence? I began to question everything. Was this all there was to life? Was the best part behind me? I was 54 now, and it felt like I was at the tail end of something. The idea of starting over seemed so daunting, but as I sat with my thoughts one evening, a realization hit me. I had been so focused on what I had lost, I had forgotten to think about what I still had. I was still here. I was still breathing. I still had a chance to create something new. I took a deep breath and decided to start small. A walk in the park, an afternoon at the local library. I began to let myself enjoy simple things again, things that had once brought me joy, but that I had long ignored. I went back to painting, something I used to love before life became so busy. I started taking walks in the mornings, enjoying the cool air on my face, listening to the sounds of the world waking up. For the first time in a long while, I was present in my own life. But the real turning point came when I ran into someone unexpected. It was at a coffee shop one afternoon, just a few weeks after my small acts of reinvention began. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't even thinking about men, honestly. But there he was, standing in line, with a friendly smile and eyes that felt like they could see straight into my soul. His name was Daniel. He was in his late 30s, a man who had an easy confidence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are. Our conversation was effortless, as if we had known each other for years. We talked about everything, books, music, even politics, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt alive. It wasn't the physical attraction that struck me immediately, but the connection. He made me laugh. He made me feel interesting and important and present again. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we began to meet up for coffee or dinner. It wasn't anything serious at first. We were just two people enjoying each other's company. But as the days passed, I found myself looking forward to our meetings more and more. It was the first time in years that I had felt a spark of something new. At first, I was hesitant. I had so many doubts. Was I ready for this? Could I open myself up to someone again? What if I made a mistake? But Daniel never rushed me. He was patient. He listened when I talked about my past, about David, about everything that had led me to this point. He didn't judge me for the mistakes I had made. In fact, he encouraged me to embrace them. You are who you are because of everything you've been through, he said. Don't ever apologize for that. I had spent so many years apologizing for things that weren't even my fault. But with Daniel, I felt like I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to be anything other than who I was in that moment. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that who I was, just as I was enough. As the weeks passed, I found myself falling for Daniel in a way I didn't expect. I wasn't looking for love. I had convinced myself that love was something I had already experienced, something that had run its course. I thought I was too old to feel that rush of excitement, too much of a realist to believe in love at this stage of my life. But with Daniel, it felt different. He never made me feel older than I was. In fact, the age gap between us didn't seem to matter. It was as if we were two people who had found each other at exactly the right time. Daniel was kind, patient, and above all, respectful of my past. I found myself looking forward to every phone call, every text, every moment spent with him. We laughed a lot, which was something I hadn't done in years. He brought a lightness into my life that I hadn't realized was missing. One evening, we decided to go to a local art exhibit. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a small gallery showcasing local artists, but it felt like an adventure. We walked around the gallery, discussing the pieces on display, sharing our thoughts on the artists' interpretations of love, life, and loss. There was something so comforting about the way we communicated. There was no pressure to be anything other than ourselves. I was able to be vulnerable with him, something I hadn't done in a long time. It wasn't about grand gestures or romantic words. It was the simplicity of being together, of sharing a space, of being present in each other's lives. With Daniel, I learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the small gestures, the way he always opened the door for me, or how he would remember the little things I said weeks ago. He made me feel seen in a way I had forgotten was possible. But even though I was happy, the fear of judgment still lingered. The whispers, the raised eyebrows, the concerned looks from people who couldn't understand why a woman my age was dating someone so much younger. It didn't matter how much Daniel made me feel special. There was always that nagging voice in the back of my mind asking, what would people think? It didn't help that my friends and family were concerned. My best friend Susan pulled me aside one afternoon, and with the utmost care, asked if I was sure about this relationship. "He's so much younger than you," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "Don't you think it's too soon for you to be moving on? Maybe you should take it slow." I knew she meant well, but I was tired of living my life based on other people's fears. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life holding myself back because of what others thought was right or appropriate. I had spent too many years apologizing for my choices, and I wasn't about to start again. One evening, after another beautiful dinner with Daniel, I made a decision. I was no longer going to let fear control my life. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own doubts, tell me that I didn't deserve happiness. I had earned this. I needed to be brave. I needed to tell Daniel how I felt about him, how much he meant to me, because if I didn't say it now, I might never get the chance. So I took a deep breath and asked him to meet me in the park the next afternoon. When we sat down on the bench in that quiet corner of the park, I could tell something was different. The air between us was charged with an unspoken understanding. I knew he was feeling what I was feeling. "Daniel," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I don't know where this is going, but I need you to know something. I'm falling for you. I never expected to feel this way again, especially after everything that happened. But you've made me feel like I matter again, like I'm not too old to love, to be loved, and that means more to me than you'll ever know." His eyes softened as he took my hand in his. "Sophie," he said gently, "I'm falling for you too. And it's not because you're younger or older, but because of who you are. You're strong, beautiful, and wise. You've been through so much, and I admire that more than anything." It was in that moment that I realized I had found something rare, something that had nothing to do with age or time. It was love, raw and real, in its simplest form. We didn't need anyone's approval to make it work. We just needed to be ourselves, and that was enough. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Every step of this journey is a step forward, and I'm so glad you're here with me, taking it together. Let me know if you're ready for the next part of the story. The weeks following that confession felt like a whirlwind of emotions, but also a period of growth. Daniel and I were moving forward, each day bringing us closer together. And yet, something in me felt unsettled. It wasn't the relationship itself. It was the pressure of the world around us. I could feel the eyes on us everywhere we went. The subtle glances from strangers, the murmurs in the grocery store, the stares from people I had known for years. It wasn't just curiosity, it was judgment. The question was always the same in their minds. What was I doing with him? Even though Daniel never made me feel anything less than valued, I began to feel like I was constantly defending my choices. Every time someone asked about us or commented on our age gap, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. It was as if the approval of others mattered more than the happiness we had found together. One day, as Daniel and I sat at our favorite cafe, enjoying our usual afternoon coffee, I noticed a couple at the next table exchanging hushed words. The woman kept glancing at us, her eyes narrowing with each passing second. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, she turned to her partner and said, "Can you believe that? A woman her age, with a guy young enough to be her son. What is she thinking?" I could feel my heart race, my cheeks flush with embarrassment. But before I could say anything, Daniel squeezed my hand gently, offering me his silent support. I glanced at him, my eyes pleading for some reassurance, some sign that it was okay, that we were okay. "Don't listen to them," he whispered softly, his eyes locking onto mine with a tenderness that made me feel like the world had just faded away. "You're incredible. We're incredible. Let them talk. Our happiness is ours to keep, no one else's." His words were like a balm for my soul. I took a deep breath and focused on the warmth of his touch. In that moment, I realized that the opinions of others, no matter how loud or harsh, would never matter if we didn't let them. Our connection, our love, was ours alone to nurture. But even with Daniel's support, I found myself wrestling with my own insecurities. There were times when I doubted myself, wondered if I was making a mistake, if I was somehow jeopardizing my future by diving into a relationship with someone younger. The voice of society, the whispers, the judgment, all crept into my thoughts, making me second-guess my every move. And then there was the question I could never quite shake. Was I enough? Was I enough for Daniel, who had so much life ahead of him, so many experiences yet to be lived? Did he truly see me, or was I just a stepping stone in his journey? I remember one particular evening, sitting in the living room of my apartment, feeling a quiet sadness wash over me. I had just gotten off the phone with my daughter Lily, who had been concerned about my relationship with Daniel. "Mom, I just want you to be careful. Are you sure this is right? What if it's just a phase for him? What if he's not really thinking long term?" Her words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was right. That night, Daniel came over, and we spent a quiet evening together, watching an old black-and-white movie, sipping wine, and just being. But as we sat there, my mind kept wandering back to those doubts. I had to know, was I just a temporary distraction for him, or did he see a future with me? I needed to hear the words. "Daniel," I said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between us, "I have to ask you something. Are you really in this for the long haul? Or am I just a fling to you?" For a moment, he didn't answer, and the silence between us felt like an eternity. But then he turned to me, his eyes filled with an emotion I hadn't expected, something deep, something sincere. "Sophie," he began, his voice steady, but with an intensity that made my heart race. "I'm here because I want to be here. I'm not with you because you're older, or because you're some sort of phase. I'm with you because you make me a better man. You make me feel things I didn't even know I could feel. And I want to see where this goes, with you, every step of the way." His words pierced through the veil of doubt that had been clouding my heart. In that moment, I knew that the love we shared wasn't about age or appearances or the expectations of others. It was about us, and it was real. But even with that reassurance, the world around us didn't stop judging. In fact, the whispers got louder. People began to talk, and I started to feel the sting of their disapproval every time I left my house with Daniel. They weren't just judging us, they were judging me, and it hurt. The pressure was building, and I could feel the strain it was starting to put on our relationship. I wasn't just fighting society anymore. I was fighting my own fears, my own doubts. What if I wasn't enough for him? What if I was holding him back from something greater? Something more in line with his age, his future, his potential? "What do you think about us taking a trip?" Daniel suggested one evening, sensing my unease. "Just the two of us, somewhere far from all this noise. Somewhere we can be ourselves without anyone looking over our shoulders." His words, so simple yet so thoughtful, made me realize that maybe what we needed wasn't to silence the world, but to distance ourselves from it for a while. I needed to find peace with my own choices, and Daniel needed to feel free from the weight of everyone's judgments. And so, we decided to go to the coast, just the two of us, in a small beach town where no one knew our names. We rented a tiny cottage by the sea, far away from the prying eyes of our hometown. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore was the only soundtrack we needed. And it was there, in the quiet of the beach, that I realized I had everything I needed right in front of me. I wasn't too old to love. I wasn't too late for happiness. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And Daniel, with his love and unwavering belief in us, was the proof that we were more than enough. The weeks that followed our time at the beach felt like a rebirth for me. It was as though I had shed layers of doubt, insecurity, and fear. Being away from everything familiar had given me the space I needed to truly rediscover myself, away from the noise of the world's expectations. We spent our days exploring the coastline, walking hand in hand along the sandy shores, laughing like we had all the time in the world. We took long drives through the surrounding countryside, the car filled with the kind of easy silence that only two people who understand each other can share. It was the first time in months that I felt truly at peace. There, away from the eyes of the world, I could see what Daniel saw in me, not just the woman I had become, but the woman I was rediscovering. I remembered parts of myself that had long been buried, my spontaneity, my sense of adventure, my ability to laugh at myself and at the absurdity of life. But more than that, I began to understand that this relationship wasn't just about him making me feel seen and valued. It was also about me learning to see myself through new eyes. I had spent so many years defining myself through the lens of others, my children, my friends, my husband, always worrying about how I was perceived, always trying to fit into the boxes that society created for me. With Daniel, I realized that I no longer had to be defined by those labels. I wasn't just the mother, the wife, the grandmother. I was Sophie, I was a woman capable of love, of passion, of adventure, no matter my age, and that was a revelation. I remember one evening as we watched the sunset together, I turned to Daniel and said, "I've spent so many years thinking my best years were behind me, that I had reached some point where my life would just settle into routine and quiet. But being with you, it's like I'm starting again, and I'm realizing that I'm not done. I'm not finished. I'm just getting started." Daniel's face softened, and he took my hand, his touch gentle, his eyes full of understanding. "Sophie, you've always been starting. You've always had the strength to move forward. I just came along for the ride." His words, so simple, yet so profound, hit me deep in my chest. It was true. I had always been strong, even when I didn't feel like I was. And now, with Daniel beside me, I felt like I could take on the world. I could see clearly now how much I had changed, not just in terms of my relationship with Daniel, but in the way I viewed my own life. I had spent too long living for other people, letting their opinions shape my choices, but I wasn't going to do that anymore. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch of our little cottage, I looked at Daniel and said, "I think it's time to go back, time to face the world, time to face everything we've been avoiding." Daniel smiled, his eyes full of warmth and encouragement. "Whenever you're ready, Sophie, I'm with you. We'll face it together." And so, we returned to our town, to the lives we had put on hold, ready to face whatever came next. I knew there would be challenges. There always are when you step outside the norms, when you live a life that others don't understand. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever been. I was no longer afraid of the world's judgment, because I had learned to love myself first, to value what I had with Daniel above everything else. When we got home, things were different. I wasn't the same person who had left. I had changed in ways I couldn't even explain to others, but I felt it. And Daniel, with his quiet strength and unconditional support, had been there every step of the way. I could feel the weight of the town's eyes on us again. But this time, it didn't bother me. Yes, there were whispers, and yes, people talked behind our backs, but I had stopped caring about the opinions of those who didn't matter. What mattered was how I felt when I was with Daniel, and how I felt when I looked at myself in the mirror. I had found peace in my choices, in my own heart, and I was no longer ashamed of what made me happy. It was liberating. I began to focus on my own happiness more than ever before. I started taking up hobbies I had long since abandoned, painting, reading for pleasure, even trying new recipes in the kitchen. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to live life fully, without regrets or hesitation. And as the months passed, the outside world seemed to grow quieter. The judgment, the whispers, became nothing more than background noise. People eventually accepted us, some with open arms, others with skeptical glances, but I had stopped needing their approval. What mattered was that Daniel was there beside me every step of the way. We had found something beautiful, something real, and no amount of judgment or criticism could take that away from us. I had finally learned what it meant to truly live for myself, and in doing so, I discovered a love that was even more powerful than I could have ever imagined. Returning home wasn't easy. As much as I had changed during our time away, life back in town was still the same. The familiar streets, the old shops, and even the people, many of whom I hadn't seen in months, reminded me of the life I had tried to leave behind. But this time, I was different, and that made all the difference. The first few days back were a whirlwind. There was so much to do, reconnecting with family, checking in with old friends, and of course, facing the people who had known me for years. The biggest challenge, however, was dealing with the elephant in the room. The inevitable questions, the stares, the whispers behind closed doors. I had always lived my life according to the expectations of others, but now I had to learn to live for myself, to do what made me happy without worrying about judgment. I wasn't sure how to navigate this new version of myself in a town that had known me as the devoted wife, the mother, the grandmother. Would they understand? Would they accept the changes I had made in my life? Or would they see me as someone who had abandoned everything they thought I stood for? It started slowly. Small interactions with neighbors, casual conversations at the grocery store were all reminders of how different I had become. One afternoon, while picking up some bread at the bakery, I bumped into Joan, a woman I had known for years. She was someone I had always shared friendly exchanges with, but our friendship had never been particularly close. "Well, well, Sophie," she said, eyeing me with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "You're looking different." I smiled, but there was an awkwardness in the air. "Thank you, Joan. I've been making some changes." She raised an eyebrow, and I could tell she was fishing for more information. She had heard the rumors, just like everyone else. "Is everything okay with you and Daniel?" she asked, leaning in a little too close for comfort. I took a deep breath. "Yes, everything is fine. We're good. Really good." Joan nodded, her eyes scanning me as if she was trying to read between the lines. "Well, you do seem happier." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I'm glad for you, Sophie. I really am. It's good to see you finding yourself again." I didn't know whether her words were sincere or just a polite attempt at being supportive, but I appreciated the effort. The thing was, I wasn't doing this for anyone's approval anymore. I wasn't trying to gain anyone's validation. I was doing it for me. Later that evening, as Daniel and I sat in the kitchen, the light from the overhead lamp casting a soft glow over the table, I told him about my brief encounter with Joan. "People are starting to notice," I said, stirring my tea absent-mindedly. "I'm not sure if they'll ever fully accept the changes I've made. Some of them think I'm being reckless, and others are just plain curious. I can feel the judgment in the air." Daniel reached over, taking my hand in his. His touch was always so comforting, grounding me when I needed it most. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice steady, "what matters is that you've found your way. You've found your happiness. If they can't accept that, that's on them, not you. You don't owe anyone an explanation." His words were a balm to my soul, but the truth was that I wasn't entirely at peace with the idea of being judged. I had lived my entire life trying to please others, trying to be what everyone expected me to be. And now, I was standing in a place where I had to trust that my own happiness was enough. It was a difficult concept to embrace fully. The next week, I ran into my sister Marie at the local cafe. She was the one person in my life who had always been there, no matter what. I could tell she was dying to ask me about everything that had happened, but she was trying to be subtle. "Sophie, it's good to see you," she said, her eyes searching mine as we sat down with our coffees. "I've been hearing some things around town. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "I'm more than okay, Marie," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm happy, and I've never felt more at peace with my decisions." Her eyes softened, and she smiled, her relief palpable. "I'm glad, Sophie. I really am. I know it's been a lot for everyone, but I just want you to be happy. You've spent so many years making everyone else happy. You deserve this." I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you. It's been a journey, but I'm finally learning to live for myself." As we continued to chat, I could feel the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. With every conversation, every affirmation from those who truly cared about me, I began to believe that the path I had chosen was the right one. Still, there were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that the world was watching, judging, waiting for me to slip up. But in those moments, I would remind myself of the person I had become. I was no longer the woman who lived for the approval of others. I had learned that the only approval I needed was my own. As the days passed, I felt myself stepping further away from the old version of me. There were still echoes of the woman I had once been, and every now and then I would catch a glimpse of her in the mirror. But those moments were fleeting. I was no longer defined by the roles others expected me to play. I was carving my own path now, and for the first time in years, I felt free. But freedom, I quickly learned, wasn't as simple as it seemed. It wasn't just about letting go of the chains of the past. It was also about facing the unknown. My life with Daniel was new and uncharted, and as much as I loved the possibilities it held, it was still a leap into unfamiliar territory. How would it feel to build a future that didn't carry the weight of expectations? How could we build something lasting, something real, when the world around us seemed determined to dissect every part of it? One afternoon, as we walked through the park, Daniel reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, but one that held so much meaning. It was his way of showing that, despite the whispers, despite the uncertainty, we were still moving forward together. "You know," Daniel said, his voice breaking the comfortable silence, "I think we're doing the right thing. I know there are people who don't understand, but they don't have to. We don't live for them. We live for us." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. I keep reminding myself of that every day, but I can't help but feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. Daniel looked at me with understanding. That's natural. We've spent so much time being what others expect. But the truth is, we're not doing anything wrong. We're just choosing to live on our terms. And that's not something to be ashamed of. I took a deep breath, looking up at the sky. The clouds were starting to part, letting a streak of sunlight shine through. It was like the universe was giving me a sign. I think you're right, I said, squeezing his hand. I've spent so many years doing what was expected, not what I truly wanted. And now, I finally feel like I'm taking control of my life again. We continued walking, the sound of our footsteps in sync. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of it. I had Daniel by my side, and that was enough for me. The following weeks brought new challenges and opportunities. I found myself spending more time with the people I had once considered friends, but also with new faces, people who hadn't been a part of my life before, but who seemed to understand the changes I was going through. They didn't judge. They didn't ask questions. They simply accepted me for who I was. It was refreshing to be around people who didn't need to know the details of my past to see the person I was now. One evening, as I was sitting at a cafe with a woman I had met through Daniel, I was struck by how easy it was to open up when there were no preconceived notions about who I was. Her name was Rachel, and she was a few years younger than me, but her energy was infectious. We bonded over a shared love of painting, and soon our conversations began to feel like a breath of fresh air. "You know," Rachel said, her voice thoughtful, "I admire how you've been able to reinvent yourself. Most people would never have the courage to do what you're doing." I looked at her, surprised. "It's not as easy as it seems," I admitted, "but it's necessary. I had to get to this point where I could finally look at myself and say, this is who I am, and I had to stop worrying about everyone else." She smiled, her eyes bright. "It's funny, isn't it? How we spend so much time trying to be who we think we're supposed to be, when all along we just need to be ourselves." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for this new chapter in my life. It's the hardest thing, but also the most rewarding. I'm learning to be true to myself, and that's more than I could have asked for. As the evening wore on, Rachel and I continued talking, our conversation flowing easily. I hadn't felt this at peace in ages. There was no pressure, no hidden agendas, just two people connecting as they were, without any expectations. Later that night, when I returned home, Daniel was already there, sitting in the living room, reading a book. He looked up when I walked in, and his eyes softened as he saw me. "How was your day?" he asked, setting the book aside. "It was good," I said, sitting down beside him. "I met someone new today. Her name is Rachel. She's different, refreshing, really." Daniel smiled. "That sounds nice. It's good to meet new people, especially ones who make you feel good about yourself." I leaned back on the couch, resting my head against his shoulder. "I think I'm starting to feel like I belong again, in a way I haven't for a long time." Daniel wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. "You do belong, Sophie. You've always belonged, and you've got a whole new world to discover, together." We sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of the room enveloping us. As much as the world outside was changing, this was my constant. This was where I felt safe, where I felt seen. And with Daniel by my side, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. As time passed, my doubts about myself began to fade. I realized I was far from broken. I was just a woman rediscovering her strength. When everything seemed to crumble around me, it was not the end, but a chance for rebirth. I found myself again, in ways I never expected. The thought of a fresh start, even at this age, had seemed impossible. But now I could see how much life was still left to be lived. When I discovered that my husband was having an affair, it was like someone pulled the rug from under me. I wasn't sure how to even begin to process the reality of it all. But the more I let myself feel, the more I realized how much I had been neglecting myself, how many parts of me had been forgotten. My own desires, my dreams, my needs, they had all been buried under years of routine and neglect. And so, when everything collapsed, I found the courage to rebuild. It was a slow journey, but with every step, I felt more alive. I had no idea what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, I was looking forward to it. I wasn't just a wife, a mother, a homemaker. I was me, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were challenging. As I tried to rebuild myself, the echoes of betrayal still reverberated in my mind. Every time I looked in the mirror, I tried to convince myself that what had happened didn't define who I was. But honestly, it was hard not to feel as if a part of me had been ripped away. My heart still ached when I thought of Sebastião, not because of the pain he caused, but because of the loss of something that seemed unbreakable, something I thought we could rebuild. But the reality was cruel, and there was no more room for illusions. At the same time, something inside me began to stir. Like a flame slowly flickering to life, I began to feel a new strength, a desire to live, to be myself again. I wanted more than to be just the abandoned wife. I wanted to be the woman I had always been before I got lost in obligations, children, and marriage. I wanted to reclaim my spark, my confidence, my essence. It was during this journey of rediscovery that one day, while I was in the city center for a doctor's appointment, something unexpected happened. I had just left the clinic and was heading to the pharmacy when I bumped into someone. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to do. The smile he gave me made my heart race a little faster. He was young, maybe 10 or 15 years younger than me, with intense eyes and a confident demeanor that contrasted with my own insecurities. "Hey, Margaret, didn't expect to see you here," he said in a soft but firm tone. I almost didn't recognize him, but when he mentioned my name, something clicked. It was Raphael, the carpenter who had worked at my house. I stood there for a few seconds, speechless, feeling the energy between us. He looked even more charming than I remembered, and the way he looked at me, as if he truly saw me, made something inside me stir. That brief encounter was like a breath of life. "Hey, Raphael," I managed to reply, trying to hide the nervousness that was building in my stomach. "I was just passing by. How are you?" He smiled, and this time the conversation flowed more easily. Raphael didn't seem to be treating me like an older woman, or just a housewife. He spoke to me as if I truly mattered. We didn't talk about the renovations or tiles, but about me, about how I was doing, how life had been treating me. And it was in that brief moment that something shifted. I saw myself again, the woman I thought I had left behind. Over the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment with Raphael. It was like a spark had been ignited, and suddenly, I felt alive again. He had seen me, truly seen me, not as a wife or a mother, but as the woman I was before life became a series of routines. I hadn't realized how badly I needed that kind of attention, that kind of validation, until I experienced it again. I started to question what I had been accepting in my life, and more importantly, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of feeling special once more. As time passed, Raphael and I began to see each other more often. At first, it was innocent, just casual chats here and there. He'd stop by for the occasional repair or to check on a few things around the house. But with each visit, it was clear that there was something more between us. We started talking more openly about our lives, our dreams, and the things that made us feel alive. I felt a connection growing, and it wasn't just physical. It was emotional, something I hadn't experienced in years. One evening, after a long day of him working on a project at my house, we ended up sitting on the porch, just talking. The evening air was cool, and the sky was full of stars. I had no idea how it happened, but there was a moment when our conversation paused, and we found ourselves staring at each other. It was as if time stopped. The silence between us was comfortable, but there was an unspoken tension in the air that neither of us was ready to address, yet we both knew was there. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I admire your strength, Margaret. It's rare to meet someone with such resilience." I blinked, a little surprised. It wasn't a compliment I had expected. For so long, I felt invisible, unnoticed, as if I had been living in the shadows of my own life. But Raphael, he saw me, not just as a woman who had lived through years of hardship, but as a person capable of much more. "Thank you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't feel strong most days, but sometimes people like you remind me that I can still be." He smiled, and there was something so sincere in that smile that I felt a warmth spreading inside me. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years. "I think you've forgotten how powerful you truly are," he said quietly. "You just need to remember." That simple statement hit me harder than anything else. It was like a key turning in my heart, unlocking a door I had kept shut for too long. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had forgotten the woman I used to be, the woman who laughed, loved fiercely, and wasn't afraid to chase after what she wanted. Maybe I had spent so long in a place of hurt and resignation that I had stopped believing I deserved more. Raphael's words stayed with me long after he left that night, and that was the moment I realized something monumental. I didn't need to hold on to the past, to the hurt, or the years of neglect. I didn't need to cling to a marriage that had long since died. What I needed was to let go, to move forward, to rediscover who I was, and to allow myself the possibility of love, real love, again. But that would come with its own set of challenges. Would I have the courage to follow through? Would I be brave enough to embrace this new chapter? And more importantly, would I be able to face the consequences of opening my heart to someone so much younger than me? These questions kept me awake at night, but one thing was clear. I wasn't willing to live my life in the shadow of what was. I had finally started to understand that I was worthy of a love that was real, honest, and full of passion. And I was ready to explore what that might look like, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone and into the unknown. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that staying in a life of regrets and unspoken desires wasn't an option anymore. I had spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy, putting my own needs and desires on the back burner. But now I could feel something stirring inside me, a fierce determination to stop pretending, to stop living for others' expectations, and start living for myself. Raphael had come into my life like a breath of fresh air, and for the first time in a long while, I could see a future that wasn't defined by the mistakes of my past or by the suffocating routine that had become my reality. But the reality of what I was doing, of where my emotions were leading me, wasn't lost on me. I knew the consequences could be huge. What would people say? What about my children? What if they couldn't accept this? Would they understand that this wasn't about age or about trying to reclaim youth? This was about feeling alive again, about being seen, about wanting to love and be loved for who I truly was, not for who I was supposed to be. And yet, there was an undeniable pull that I couldn't resist. Raphael made me feel seen in a way that my marriage with Sebastio had long since stopped. His attention was genuine, his care, his admiration. It was all real, and it made me question everything I thought I knew about love. But I couldn't ignore the reality that I was still married, still bound to the man who had broken my heart time and time again. Sebastio and I had shared years, memories, and a life together. But somewhere along the way, those years had turned into mere shadows, and the love between us had withered. It wasn't just the infidelity that had destroyed us. It was the years of silence, the disconnection, the emptiness. And yet, a part of me still held on. That part of me was torn between loyalty and the undeniable need for something more, something that felt like it could heal the pieces of me I had long ago closed off. That night, I found myself sitting by the window, looking out at the moonlit sky, feeling a strange calm wash over me. I realized I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future would hold or how things would unfold, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to make a choice to live for myself, to follow the path that felt right for me, even if it was uncertain and unpredictable. The decision was mine, and mine alone. And as I sat there in the quiet of the night, I whispered to myself, "It's time for me to be free." The next morning, I called Raphael. I didn't know where this would go or how it would all play out, but I was ready to find out, ready to take the next step, because no matter the challenges, no matter the judgment, I had learned one crucial thing. I was worthy of happiness, and it was never too late to go after it. So, here I was, on the verge of something new, something bold. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt the excitement of a new beginning. What do you think? Did I make the right decision? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share your perspective. Your opinions mean so much to me, and they could help someone else who's going through something similar. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration. Let's spread hope and remind everyone that it's never too late to find happiness. Thank you for being part of this journey. Let's keep walking together,